Yep.
Where's the other two?
Are we ready? Well, it's 9:30. We're going to get started. So, good morning. I'm Senator John Harrington, representing the Senate District 67, the far east side of St. Paul. Over the course of this session, I've received numerous calls and letters asking me about Senate File 1357 and the House File, sometimes referred to as the Shoot First bill. Among the many letters that I've received, I got one this morning as I was coming in, and I'd like to just use that as a kind of an opening as to why we're here today. It reads, "Dear Legislator, please oppose the Shoot First bill. The bill's sponsor, Tony Cornish, said last week he hadn't researched whether anyone in Minnesota has been charged or convicted for self-defense. Why is he proposing this bill then? Minnesota law already protects self-defense. This bill would make it extremely difficult to prosecute murder. Please listen to the Minnesota police chiefs, peace officers, and county attorneys associations who testified against the bill. Law enforcement also objected to changes in the state background check permitting systems limits on the ability to take guns out of domestic violence situations and opening Minnesota to gun permit holders from states with lower standards." That's the question for this morning, the question of why. Why do we need this law? And the public safety consequences that are raised if this law becomes, whether this bill becomes law. I raised them with Representative Cornish last Friday, and I asked him how he could write a bill that would put the public and police at greater risk. I reminded him that even in a case here in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, when a police officer was shot and killed by a homeowner, that homeowner was found not guilty based on our current and existing law. I promised I would get him the information about the Sergeant David Mack case, and I've done that this morning. And I hope that he will pull this legislation based on the information he's going to hear from these folks today and the information that I've sent him. In light of the calls that I received from police, I'm pleased to have the real experts on public safety here with me today. Gathered here today are chiefs from a variety of agencies, but most prominently Chief Tom Smith and Chief Tim Dolan from our two biggest cities, and county attorneys Jim Backstrom and Mike Freeman, who are responsible for making sure that justice is served in Dakota and Hennepin County. We're going to start out with Chief Tim Dolan of the Minneapolis Police Department.
Good morning, all of you, and thanks for coming. I've been under the weather recently, so I'll try to keep it short so I don't break into a cough fit here. But I just want to say, speaking for Minneapolis, speaking for my officers, and a city in which we care about the public safety very much, lessening the expectations on when you shoot somebody is not good for public safety. I've had numerous officers shot at point of entry. I've been shot at point of entry in working SWAT for 20-some years. It's dangerous enough as it is. We had an officer, like you heard, Officer Mack, who was killed, and he was serving a warrant. So we ended up changing our policy so that we're doing warrants very visibly in uniform. But to lessen those expectations about shooting at somebody on a property or any other place in the city is not good for public safety. It's not good for the general public, and that's why we're here today. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and I echo everything that my colleague Chief Dolan said. Chief Tom Smith, and being the chief of the capital city, it's very important that we provide great public service, public safety to our citizens. To do that, number one, our officers have to be safe, and number two, we have to keep our citizens safe. But we always have to have that eye towards how do we protect our officers so when they go into harm's way that they have the tools to do their job. Personally, I believe this bill in its current format is way too ambiguous. It doesn't answer some critical questions. You know, in a city and urban environment, I too, like Chief Dolan, work SWAT. I was a patrol officer for many years. I have been shot at, and I've been at some tragic situations where officers have lost their life. When we're running through backyards, if a neighbor calls us right now because he hears a suspicious noise in the back of his yard, we're going to go around and we're going to go into backyards, or we may chase a suspect through backyards. if you wake up, I'm just using common sense, in the middle of the night and you're startled by some noises in the back of your yard, does that mean now you can pull out your firearm and possibly engage with a police officer, especially when it's at night, especially when you can't see our badge shining so brightly? These are important questions need to be answered. When we look at domestic violence, the bill addresses that, and I've looked at that. Domestic violence is something that we are working on in St. Paul with our Blueprint for Safety. It's very important that we make sure that in domestic violence cases, we've got a couple different things now. Officers coming into a situation, but does that allow someone more flexibility to inflict harm on someone else? I just ask you those questions, common sense questions. I think it's very important for us to try to find those answers. To number one, again, I want to end with keeping officers safe so they can protect and serve our citizens, and then never put us in a confrontation with citizens that don't even know that we're there. Don't know that we're there. Number two, I know we have prosecutors here, I won't steal their thunder, but it concerns me greatly that neighbors, in a simple neighbor dispute, or someone who is upset, or someone that comes to your fence line or inside of your yard, if you don't have a fence, and says, I'm going to punch you out, or whatever. I'm being very, very careful with my words here this morning. Does that mean you can go in your house, or if you have your weapon on you, because you can carry a weapon in your yard, and can you shoot that person? Has anybody looked to see, do they have an answer to that question? I don't see it here. And I think, again, the bill needs to be looked at. It needs to be revised if anything is done so that we can provide public safety at every single level for our citizens in the state of Minnesota. Thank you.
I'm Mike Freeman, Hennepin County Attorney, and here with my colleague from Dakota County, Jim Backstrom, and as the immediate past and the present president of the Minnesota County Attorneys Association. And I'm pleased to be here with brothers and sisters from the legislature, duly elected, and with the officers here who try to keep the peace. In our view, public safety and criminal justice bills ought to enhance safety. This one does not. In our view, criminal justice and public safety bills ought to enhance justice, and this bill does not. In our view, public safety and criminal justice bills ought to be collaborative efforts, and the fact that law enforcement, distinguished senators, and prosecutors are here reflect that this bill has not been vetted, it has not been negotiated, it has not been adequately discussed. Frankly, this is a bill that's chasing a problem that doesn't exist. We simply don't have a case that Backstrom and I can recall in which a person appropriately defending their home was prosecuted inappropriately. We see cases in which we decline prosecution because self-defense is an element all the time. This is not a problem. This will create problems. And we urge the legislature and we urge the governor to reject it. Jim?
Thank you, Mike. Senator Harrington, for bringing us all together here this morning. I'm Jim Backstrom, the Dakota County Attorney. I'm pleased to be here with my colleagues in law enforcement and the members of the legislature who oppose this bill. This bill is unnecessary. It's overly broad. It's not needed under Minnesota law. As Mike Freeman has stated, you know, we have to be perfectly clear about this. Under the law today in Minnesota, a person can lawfully defend themselves with deadly force inside their home if someone is in their home committing a felony, with no duty to retreat. If a person is outside of their home, they can protect themselves today with deadly force to avert a threat of death or great bodily harm, provided that they first attempt to avoid the danger, if that is reasonably possible. Those are appropriate rules to have in place. This law would eliminate the appropriate standard that exists under our law that when deadly force is used, it has to be reasonable and necessary given the gravity of the circumstances. That's an appropriate rule to have in place. This law would eliminate it. This law would, in essence, allow persons to shoot first and ask questions later whenever they believe they are exposed to substantial harm, regardless of how a reasonable person would have acted under the circumstances. That is simply inappropriate and should not be enacted. As a former president of the National District Attorneys Association said when he was discussing similar laws that have been enacted in other states, this law, as he indicated, and it's true here in Minnesota as well, would basically give citizens more rights to use deadly force than we currently give our police officers, and with less review. That is inappropriate and should not be allowed to occur. This proposal would encourage the use of deadly force as a first response to danger. Taking a human life should be the last resort. It should not be encouraged as a first response unless the danger is reasonably apparent to all of us. That's what our current law provides, and that's what we should retain here in Minnesota. There are other provisions of this bill that are also of significant concern. One I'll mention just briefly before I turn it back to Senator Harrington, and that is the proposal in this bill which would allow anyone who obtains a permit in any permit to carry a weapon in any state in the country, regardless of how lax their permitting requirements are, to carry that weapon here in Minnesota, even if they don't comply with Minnesota law and requirements for carrying a weapon in our state. That is wrong, and it should not be allowed to occur, and it would not be in the interest of public safety. Thank you for having me here today.
In closing, I would urge Representative Cornish to pull his bill, and I would urge the Minnesota Senate to reject this bill. It increases the dangers to the public and increases the dangers to police. John Choi, the Ramsey County Attorney who could not be with us today, is also supportive of this effort, and I would also note that the MPPOA and the St. Paul Police Federation have indicated to me that they will be writing letters in support to say that they oppose this bill. When I was a young cop in St. Paul working in the east side on dog watch, I knew that when I jumped a fence chasing a bad guy, that at any time coming around a corner, that bad guy could pull a gun on me, he could pull a knife on me, he could hit me, he could try and assault me. I knew that was the risk. Those were the risks I took when I strapped on the gun and put on the badge and said I was going to protect the citizens of St. Paul. I knew that when I hopped that fence, there was a risk that I might not come home because the bad guy might get the better of me on any given day. But I didn't have to look over my shoulder to find out whether the homeowner had me in their sights too. I can't see in the back of my head. I don't think we should expect our law enforcement, our peace officers, our sheriffs to have to be able to look both ways when they're chasing a bad guy through the backyards, and I don't think that this bill will increase public safety at all. We'll stand for questions.